Hey Lux On Demand family, I'm Andy, also known as Chino Mage, and I'm super excited to welcome you to our YouTube channel for Lux Digital Church. Now, normally we do live church service streams every Wednesday evening over at twitch.tv/Lux Digital Church, starting at 8:30 p.m. EST. It's a whole lot of fun getting the chance to talk with you live and to really interact with all of you. But also, our church mainly gathers on Discord, and you'll see the link below. Grab that, head over there. We'd love to get the chance to hang out with you week in and week out. But for now, sit back and relax as we get ready for a brand new talk here on YouTube.
Hello, Lux. Pastor Mark here. And first off, I just want to acknowledge the fact this is a very different look and a very different setup than what we usually do, but I wanted to take a moment just to kind of change things up. I appreciate the amens in the chat and the fives and the thank yous for Chino Mage, the congratulations for him. If you're listening later on as part of our on-demand family, you missed the prayer time just before this. Chino announced that he is going to be joining our staff full-time in early 2024. We are so stoked and so pumped to have him come and join our team full-time, not splitting his time between a bunch of different places. It's immensely helpful for me. It's going to be amazing for our church family. We are so excited that our staff and our team here at Lux are growing, and we are excited that our church is continually growing. So many people who are here for the very first time tonight, a lot of people who are returners or their second or third time here. We're so glad to have you guys here tonight, and thank you for making Lux Digital Church what it is. If you are here for the first time tonight, I just want to give you a little challenge. Whenever you feel comfortable, take a next step with us, say hello in the chat just so we know that you're here. Believe it or not, I'm looking at the camera, but we're on a teleprompter, so I am looking at a live chat, and so I will be able to recognize if you're here for the first time. And if you are here for the first time, you can also drop a follow here on the channel. If you drop a follow on the channel, all we're going to do is send you a DM and welcome you into the community, and then invite you to come and join us on Discord next week. And if you say hello in the chat for the first time, all we're going to do is welcome you into our family and thank you for coming here and joining us tonight. But if you feel more comfortable lurking for now, don't feel bad. We love you. We appreciate you. We're glad that you're here. Lurk away until you feel comfortable coming out of lurk and saying hello. Last week, we wrapped up a 10-week-long collection of talks here at Lux called The Conversationalist, where we looked at a bunch of different stories that Jesus told throughout his life. And this week, we are in another piece of our one-shot series. And our one-shot series is, hi, St. Bear, is a collection of messages that are just sporadic throughout the year. They are only here for one time, 1 week. They're not interconnected. They are just one pieces, standalone messages like a one-shot D&D game. And so tonight we are in a one-shot message called The Money Pit, and we're going to be taking a dive into generosity and also finances. I've also promised you that we would talk about the finances of our church here at Lux, and I would answer your questions, which I will answer some tonight, but I want to let you know that I answered a lot of those questions, and we talked pretty thoroughly about our 2024 budget, our plans for the future, our announcement that Andy was going to be joining us full-time in 2024, and we went over our giving and where our giving needs to be, our path towards sustainability. All of that we went over in our Monday Night Live earlier this week, and you can still catch the VOD of that on Twitch. So if you haven't caught it yet, go check it out. If you jump to about the second half, we really start digging into budget and the finances of a church and how those things work. Pastor Chris joins me, who's one of our board members and elders here at Lux and has been since the day that we started. It was a great conversation, not just a chance to get to know him better, but also a chance to get to know our church better and to give as much transparency as we possibly can on how we handle our money and where that money goes, so that people can learn that it's okay. Like, you can trust that we're not just, stealing your money and giving it all to the weird audio guy over here so he can buy, I don't know, socks and sodas. So we did that on Monday night. So if you have questions, check it out. And if you want to have a deeper conversation about the finances of our church and the way we run things, everything is an open book. So you can always feel free to DM me over on Discord. And now, before I jump into things tonight, I do want to give a slight disclaimer. The point of a giving message or a generosity message at any church, at least for me, is not to guilt you into anything. God actually says in his word that he likes a cheerful giver, not a guilt-ridden giver or a guilt-laden giver. And so if you are in a situation right now where you feel like just guilt is building up on you, just know that isn't my intention, nor is it my purpose. There's lots of people who are living and trying to figure out life from various points and of time, like different points in your story and in your journey, whether you have young kids or you're buying a house for the first time or whatever. But the simple fact is that the Bible talks about money a tremendous amount, and it talks about generosity specifically. So I want to make sure that we dig into that because it's not something that you can just look over as a church. You can't just look past it. We're going to talk about why it's dangerous for a church to talk about money tonight. We're going to take a deep dive into what the Bible actually has to say about generosity and the root of what I think it's about. But first off, I wanted to give you the definition of what a money pit is, because I think we all have an experience with a money pit. So I looked it up on the internets to see what a money pit actually is. And it says this: an ongoing drain on financial resources, such as a house in frequent need of costly repairs or improvements. This also, hi Samus, this also might be maybe a car in like a lemon, something that doesn't work really well and keeps breaking down and you constantly have to pour money into it. But I think this also can be a hobby. And if I'm honest, I've had a lot of hobbies over the years that were more like money pits than anything else. And every Magic the Gathering player out there who thinks that your card collection is an investment in your retirement, understand that you are just denying the inevitable truth that you are indeed investing also in a money pit. When I think back to the money pits in my own life, I think back specifically to when I first got married and I was just kind of exploring mobile gaming. About 10 years ago, mobile gaming was starting to be big, and games that weren't just Candy Crush were beginning to come out. Games with advancement and leveling and RPGs. We started getting games like Clash of Clans and a lot of others. I remember getting Injustice Gods Among Us, a fighting game with superheroes that I absolutely loved. Hi, Fox. Don't call me out like that, Mark. I feel that 100%. But the pretty shiny cards, I know. I'm not saying we shouldn't buy them. I'm just saying that they're a money pit. So anyway, I remember getting married, and I would go to my wife, and she ran our money like pretty early on. Within the first couple of months of us being married, she began to run our money. And I remember asking for things like, honey, could I have $5? And she'd be like, what is the $5 for? We were on a tight budget. We were saving up for a house. It was kind of ridiculous for us to, be spending money all willy-nilly and frivolously on stuff. And inevitably that $5 was almost always for gems or coins or crystals or dust or whatever of the various 5 currencies that existed in the mobile game that I was playing at the time. They were money traps. I mean, they were money pits. I was pouring my money into Clash of Clans to level up my clan faster. I would pour my money into Hearthstone. I remember when I pre-ordered for $50 my first Hearthstone card set. I remember cracking open all of my packs for the Grand Tournament, which was notoriously one of the worst sets that Hearthstone has ever released, and how excited I was. And I would tell my wife, I got all of these cards, and my wife would be like, you literally got none of these things. These aren't real. They're fake. You've given them your money, and they've given you literally nothing. You don't have anything. And that was oh so true after I spent money on Elder Scrolls Legends, another card game by Bethesda, only to have it basically shut down a handful of months later. My latest obsession right now is Warcraft Rumble, another money pit. We all have money pits, and if yours isn't gaming like mine, then maybe your money pit is something else. Maybe it's the classic car that's in your garage that you swear one day you are going to finish remodeling and restoring, but let's just be realistic. It's just a money pit. Maybe that's obsession with another guitar that you're picking up, although you already own more guitars than you have time to play. Or maybe that's, for me, board games. I already have a whole slew of board games that's hit the table one time and a bunch that have never gotten to the table before. We all have things like this. We have places where our money just sort of evaporates into. My next door neighbor, who I love dearly, and he's my accountability partner and one of my absolute closest friends, has one as well. He races on a dirt track. He races sprint cars. It's a money pit. There are things that just eat up our resources. And what's really interesting is we're pretty fallible when it comes to money pits. Like we fall into them pretty easily. Like I've talked to a lot of people who, they got onto a new game and they swore that they would never spend more than $60 on this game. And 10 years later, they own $2,000 worth of skin in League of Legends. After swearing they would never spend more than a AAA title on that game because it's free. Right? And that's how they get us. I remember when Overwatch had loot boxes, and I remember when Star Wars Battlefront 2 came out, and you had to gamble and roll in order to get Darth Maul. I remember all of those things, those gimmicks, and those predatory models that were money pits that drew many of us in. Many of us just emptied our bank account, emptied out our resources. But the Bible actually has a lot to say about those resources. It says that God has given us those resources and that he has the intentions for those resources. It's not a test, but it's not unlike a test either. That God actually gives us things that we need to live off of, but he also has some level of expectation with the gift that he's given us, that we'll use the gift that he's given us in some way, shape, or form to serve his kingdom, to repair and rebuild the world in its broken state. And we actually see this all throughout the scriptures, but this passage comes to us from the book of 2 Corinthians, and it's the first of several passages for tonight, so hang in there with me. It comes to us from the writings of Paul, and it says this: "Remember this, a farmer who plants only a few seeds will get a small crop, but the one who plants generously will get a generous crop. You must each decide in your heart how much you are going to give. And don't give reluctantly or in response to pressure, for God loves a person who gives cheerfully." The passage there in the Greek is hilarion, which means a hilarious giver. That's the type of giver that God enjoys, somebody who understands generosity to that level. And we read that passage today, and sort of most of us living in a capitalist society, it seems odd. In fact, even the concept of giving our money to any sort of an entity seems a little strange. And we have to ask ourselves, why? Why would we? Well, as it turns out, the New Testament is big on generosity, and the Bible reinforces it over and over again, including Jesus himself. But it's actually something that was established well before that. For thousands of years, generosity was a major feature of the life of every Israelite. They were raised understanding the importance of what it was to be generous to your fellow Israelite people, to the fellow Jews, to the Hebrews. They also learned what it was like and the intentions of being generous to foreigners and people who were living amongst you who weren't of your people. And if you don't believe me, let's look at a handful of passages from different books in the Bible, but most of them come from wisdom literature. And instructions on how Jewish young men and women were taught how to live. And a ton of them have to deal with generosity. They're not going to be on the screen, but let me just read them to you. Deuteronomy 15, starting in verse 7, says, "If anyone is poor among your fellow Israelites in any of the towns or the land the Lord your God is giving you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted toward them, rather be open-handed and freely lend them whatever they need." There'll be other passages that say that you need to give to your fellow Israelites without interest as well. Just give freely and open-handedly. Psalm 37 says, "They, the righteous, are always generous and lend freely. Their children will be a blessing," linking generosity to the life of your children. Psalm 112 says, "God will come to those who are generous and lend freely, who conduct their affairs with justice." Proverbs 11 says, "One person gives freely, yet gains even more. Another withholds unduly, but comes to poverty. A generous person will prosper, and whoever refreshes others will be refreshed." Proverbs 19 says, "Whoever is kind to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will be a reward for them for what they have done." Proverbs 21:13 says, Whoever shuts their ears to the cry of the poor, will also cry out and not be answered. Proverbs 22 says, "The generous will themselves be blessed, for they share their food with the poor." So a lot of people really struggle with the idea of a church talking about finances. Deb Kaplan, hello. A lot of people really struggle with the idea of a church talking about finances, resources, and money. And I understand that. But the Bible talks about it over and over and over and over and over again. And I understand why people are nervous about it. They want to be able to trust the person that they're giving to. Most people feel like when they go to a church and they put some money in the basket, or you're a place like this and you scan a QR code and give on our website, that in some shape, way, or form that you're giving the money to me. And to be honest with you, when I come to talk about generosity and money, despite the fact that my wife have tithed since day one, 10% of what has come in has always gone back out to the church. It started that way with the church that we served before now. It's been that way since the day we started at Lux. Before we were taking a paycheck, we were tithing back in to the church. That's just how we've lived. And I've learned that living that way, I've learned that being generous has been an enormous benefit that we've always had, not just as much as we've needed. We've always had more than what we've needed. In fact, we've rarely ever even been at want. That God has blessed our lives and blessed our family immensely over the years. Even the fact that I get to do what I'm doing right now, which is talk to you through a teleprompter, a screen, a camera, and a mic, is simply unbelievable to me. God has really opened up the doors. But I also understand why people are hesitant to trust spiritual leaders. I mean, let's be honest. Inside the church, a lot of people have abused the generosity and the sincerity of others. Pastors have stolen money, staff members have robbed people, people have been dishonest with how they're spending their money, pastors have used the money that had been given to them to buy expensive cars and expensive shoes and expensive planes, and instead of really living as a pastor, they've sought to live more like a celebrity. And so I understand that frustration, and I can also understand why you don't naturally trust somebody who could be anywhere. I tell you where I'm from, but you don't get to meet me and you don't get to come and shake my hand. I'm a person on the internet, so I understand your natural distrust. But I have a belief that giving and living generously doesn't actually have anything to do with trust. Not saying that it's not a factor, but it certainly doesn't have to do with trusting a spiritual leader. See, for thousands of years, the Israelite people were generous, even though people abused that generosity and that sincerity. Hi, Frog. It's good to see you. Welcome to church tonight. Good to have you here. We see that in the book of 1 Samuel, specifically around a man named Eli, who was a priest, and his two sons. Let's read it really quick and take a look. It's 1 Samuel, starting in chapter 2. It says this: Now the sons of Eli were scoundrels who had no respect for the Lord or for their duties as priests. Whenever anyone offered a sacrifice, Eli's sons would send over a servant with a three-pronged fork, and while the meat was the meat of the sacrificed animal was still boiling, the servant would stick the fork into the pot and demand whatever it brought up to be given to Eli's sons. All the Israelites who came to worship at Shiloh were treated this way. Sometimes the servants would even come even before the animal's fat had been burned on the altar. He would demand raw meat before it had been boiled so that it could be used for roasting. Now, you don't really fully understand what I'm talking about right here, or what this scenario is. The Israelites had a really strict way in which they came and made sacrifices, but the priests got to eat from the sacrifices that were made. It was one of the ways that they sort of had a living, right? Sacrifices that were brought and made to the temple, those that weren't completely burnt up, the priests, people who worked at the temple, were allowed to eat. And this was, part of their meal plan, so to speak. And so when they came and actually disrupted the sacrifices, the worship of the people, it was disheartening, discouraging. They were robbing people of the sacrifices that they themselves brought to God. They were following the rules and the regulations that God had set down. The Jews were trying to do the right thing. And Eli's sons, their spiritual leaders, were corrupt, robbing the people of the very sacrifices that they were bringing to the Lord. So spiritual abuse has been alive and well inside of religious circles and places of spiritual influence forever. There's been really great spiritual leaders over the years, and I would say by and large, there's more good ones than there are bad ones. Otherwise, most spiritual entities would no longer exist. But there are bad eggs, and there's always going to be some bad eggs. So the question is giving and living generously, open-handedly as a person really about trust? I think it's actually about worship. When I look at the Old Testament and when I look at the New Testament, when I look at the teachings of Jesus, the command to live generously and open-handedly as a follower of Jesus, as a Jewish person as well in the Old Testament, wasn't so much the option. It wasn't like, hey, live generously and bring your sacrifices to the temple. And in this passage that we read from the Apostle Paul, he was actually going to the church in Corinth to be able to collect an offering that was then going to go and support the Jews that were oppressed in Jerusalem. It wasn't a question of if we should or if we shouldn't. It wasn't a question of do you trust or do you not. It was a question of who do you worship? Because if you worship God, if you worship the God, well then it's more about that than it is about whom you trust. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't trust me, and I'm not saying I shouldn't be trustworthy, because by all means, I should. And there's real significant consequences for spiritual leaders that are not trustworthy with the blessings and the generosity of God's people. In fact, in this story, Eli's sons go out to battle shortly after, and they're both killed in a single day, and the ark of the Lord is taken. That message gets back to Eli, and it's so surprising to him that he flips back on his chair and breaks his neck. God kills all three of them in a single day. The sons for their wickedness, and their father because he knew what was going on as a spiritual leader and didn't do anything about it. So there is real wrath and judgment that faces anybody like me who's in a place of some level of spiritual authority or guidance over people. If I would choose to rob people, it's not just robbing people, it's robbing God himself. It's standing against him. And the very fear of the Lord should stand in the face of every spiritual leader who has to stand face to face with Jesus one day and answer for every action that they chose and every word that has exited their mouth. Which brings up this point in my message, that everything that a Christian does And if you're here tonight, this is a real insider message. So if you're not a believer, you're not a Christian, and you think the church is crap, thank you for tuning in and thank you for sticking around. And I realize that I'm not talking directly to you. This is a message for the house. It's a lot of people who call our church home. Everything that you do, every decision that you make, every word that you speak, every movement of your body, everything about your life, every thought that enters your head, every place that you go, answers a simple question. Every action answers this question: do you worship the one that is above, or do you worship the things that are below? Do you worship the things that are above, or do you worship the things that are below? This is echoed in the book of Exodus, and one of my favorite stories of the people of God leaving Egypt and heading into the wilderness. I'm going to read it to you. It's the longest passage for tonight, so stick with me. Hi, Mama Llama. It's good to see you. Welcome in tonight. It says this: when the people saw how long it was taking Moses to come back down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron. Come on, they said, make us some gods who can lead us. We don't know what happened to this fellow Moses who brought us out of the land of Egypt. So Aaron said, take the gold rings from their ears, from the ears of your wives and your sons and daughters, and bring them to me. All of the people took the gold rings from their ears and brought them to Aaron. And Aaron took the gold, melted it down, and molded it into the shape of a calf. And when the people saw it, they exclaimed, "O Israel, these are the gods who brought you out of the land of Egypt." The Jews had been delivered from slavery in Egypt. The Jews had been protected from Pharaoh. The Jews had been provided for in the wilderness with both water and manna food. The Jews were then standing literally at the foot of a mountain that was consumed in fire, and the very voice of God thundered from the clouds and rolled down the mountain to the valley below where they existed. They had experienced God's supernatural intervention when they were brought out of Egypt. They had experienced his supernatural protection as he protected them from Pharaoh. There's his supernatural provision as he provided for them in the wilderness. And he was experiencing his supernatural revelation as Moses went onto the mountain covered in fire, and they experienced the very presence and voice of God thundering from the hills above. And even in experiencing these supernatural things of who God was, even in sight of the mountain covered in fire, of the manna laying on the ground, even with the memory of walking through the Red Sea and hearing the voice and the breath of God, Ruach, spoke through the valley, even having all of those experiences in front of them, they still chose to worship the things their hand could make rather than worshiping the God that made them. The truth of the matter is that for many of us, despite the fact that we know God, or we claim to know God, our lives end up being about worshiping the things that are below us because they're tangible and controllable. They're easy and they're predictable. We don't maybe bow down and worship a golden calf, but we like things that we can wrap our minds around, things that we can comprehend. We don't like a God who sets an entire mountain on fire. We don't prefer a God whose voice thunders from the mountains into the valleys below. We don't prefer worshiping a being that big, because in that being's presence, we're completely and totally out of control. We prefer to pluck the things from our ears and our nose and to toss them into a fire and to mold an idol. We may not call it a golden calf, but we might call it a high score or a kill count. We may call it a vehicle or a relationship. We may call it a bank account or a couch. We may call it a video game or friendship. There are things that we choose to worship. And see, God created us and he created everything, placing us in it at the pinnacle of his creation. And then he said, go, take, subdue, rule over everything. The earth was created for us to explore. Science was given to us to understand its depths and its heights. But instead of then worshiping the one who created it and gave it to us to explore, we end up worshiping the very things that we create with our hands. As if I could sit down and I could write out a character sheet on a Dungeons and Dragons page, and then I would bow down and worship what it is that my hands have made. Instead of rolling over, we decide to bow down to. Instead of rolling over and have dominion over, we turn and we decide to bow down to. This brings me to a passage from Jesus. Why is it that we choose to worship what is unworthy? Why is it that we choose to worship instead of the things that are above, the one that is above? We choose to worship the things that are below. I think it actually comes to us from the book of Luke chapter 12, and Jesus says this. It's a beautiful passage, and it's about the things that we love. He says this when it comes to generosity. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Provide purses for yourselves that will never wear out, a treasure in heaven that will never fail, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. I've been reading this book recently, You Are What You Love, and it's written by someone named James K.A. Smith. It comes highly recommended. And towards the very beginning of this book, James A.K. Smith quotes another author, St. Augustine. Augustine was a philosopher and a theologian many years ago, one of the church fathers, and he wrote a prolific book called The City of God. I want that book, Ice Puddle. We'll get it for you, okay? In the book, he quotes Augustine saying this. Augustine says, since our hearts are made to find their end in God, we will experience a besetting anxiety and restlessness when we try to love substitutes. To be human is to have a heart. You can't not love. So the question isn't whether you will love something as ultimate. The question is what you will love as ultimate. And you are what you love. And you are what you love. Listen, if you worship the one that is above, you will live open-handedly with the things that are below, and you will live generously with those that are beside. In other words, if you truly worship God, if you worship the one that is above, you will live with open hands with the things that you possess, because they are meaningless to you in comparison to the great and overarching and overpowering love of God. And you will live generously, giving freely to those who are beside, your brothers and sisters, fellow human beings. But if you worship the things that are below, you will resent the one that is above, and you will abuse those that are beside. Because when you worship the things below, and it is about what you can possess, when your life becomes about consumption and comfort and stability, instead of about faith and love and mercy and compassion, we inevitably resent a God above, because he always stirs us up to walk out of comfort and into faith. We will always be resentful of a God above, because he calls us not to live with too much, but instead to live with enough and to give everything else to those who need it. And we will come to a point where we will abuse the people who are beside us. We will be incapable of being a blessing to those who are on our right and our left, our fellow human beings. Why? Because we'll learn to use them in order to get more things, the things that are below, the things that we have bowed a knee to, the things that we worship. And a great indication of whether or not you worship the things that are above or the things that are the one that is above or the things that are below is by looking at the trails in your life. Now follow me. Whenever I was a child at 10 years old, my dad taught me how to hunt. I still go out with him every year, usually on the first day of deer. This is the first year since I was 10 that I'm going to miss the first day of deer season. And when we would shoot at a deer, if we didn't kill it on the first shot or if it ran some distance, he would teach us to track it, to follow its hoof prints or follow blood in the snow or in the leaves. And we would follow that animal to figure out where it was. Listen, it's one thing to say that you worship God first and foremost, but if there's no trails that lead to that, then you most likely don't. And the trails that we leave behind because of the things that we bow down and worship are found in our relationships, are found in our schedule, and they're found in our bank account, in our bank statements. Those are the places that we leave trails behind that we can follow to indicate who is it that we actually bow down and worship. Because if we worship the one above, our relationships will look redemptive. Our relationships will look like we are loving and caring for people, that we're seeking to forgive and to live open-handedly towards our brothers and sisters and our family members. If we have trails inside of our schedule, we'll see time that's blocked out to spend time in the Word and time in prayer. We won't see hours wasted and idled away in gaming or in something else. We'll actually seek the face of God. We'll want to be near and close to Him. We'll be serving inside of our church. We'll be giving sacrificially. And we'll see Him in our bank statements, because we will see where the portion that He's given to us, we've turned away and given immediately out. We've turned 10% of what He's given to us and we've given it away. And then beyond that, we've chosen to step into generous living. And if our trails lead to worshiping the things below, well, then we'll see our money spent frivolously on things that are selfish and make us temporarily feel good. We'll see our relationships experiencing wreckage and hurt and pain because of the manipulation and the abuse and the gaslighting that exist in them. We'll see our schedule clogged up with me time and the things that we want to do. We'll see our schedule clogged up with more work hours so we can make more of a buck, so that we can put more of that away, so that we can feel more secure. Our schedules and our bank statements and our relationships show trails of where we are. And I have a spoiler for you. Just because you know the right Sunday school answer when people ask you what the most important thing is in your life, which I know the answer to that is Jesus or God, doesn't mean that's actually the case. If the paths and the trails in your life don't lead you to the conclusion that you worship the one above, but instead you worship the things below, the right Sunday school answer isn't going to get you there. Only changed living is. Worshiping a living God is not a part-time activity. It's a whole body, full mind, totally engulfing experience. We choose to live and chase down that God, to walk with Him faithfully, to listen to His voice, to spend time in His Word, to get to know Him personally because we love Him and because we desire to draw close to Him. That is what worship looks like. And we trust Him. We trust Him with our time and our talent, with our treasure, with our touch. We trust Him. We trust Him. We believe that the ways that He leads and guides us is the ways that life should go for us. We follow Him. If the trails in your life lead to something else, then it might be time to begin making adjustments and changes to the way that you're choosing to live. Elf Siege, glad to have you here. And my friends, that's why it matters. Because we were made to worship up, not down. We were made to worship up. And that anxiety, that fear, that besetting feeling that Augustine talked about in the City of God, it will always continue to be part of our lives if we choose to worship the things below, because we were created to worship the one above. And generosity and sacrifice and giving and tithing really doesn't have anything to do with me or even with you. It has to do with whom you choose to worship over what you've chosen to worship. So this next little bit I wrote because I do want to give you an update, and I want to get down to brass tacks because I just want to be really clear. I want to be very, very clear. Having that faith that He will provide and care for you, as He says, absolutely, Mama Llama. Thanks for chiming in there. I want to make sure that I'm really clear. I want to make sure that I read this so I don't get it wrong. To do what we're doing at Lux requires that people tithe, not tip. This isn't a live stream that we're asking you to sub to. If this is your spiritual home, we're challenging you to give 10% of what the Lord brings in back to the work of God, for the work of God in and through the Lux family. I know that might be challenging to hear, and perhaps you're like, man, I wasn't really ready to be pushed like that tonight. Maybe you're thinking, man, I'm just not there. Let me just tell you, God doesn't ask you to give 10% because He needs your 10%. Can I just be perfectly honest? He asks you to give your 10% because he doesn't want you to miss out on what He's doing. It's an invitation into partnership with Him, into the beautiful things that He's doing in the world to reclaim and to rebuild and to restore a broken and shattered world. He's inviting you in to that very thing that He is doing. That's why He asked you to live generously, because He knew and His Son knew that if you choose to not live generously and you choose to live selfishly, you'll worship the things in the world below and you'll break the world rather than choosing to partner with Him and rebuild it. Listen, the God that owns everything in all of existence, who paves His streets with gold, who builds His walls with gemstones, who owns cattle on 1,000 hills, who owns every grain of sand on the seashore. Let me be really clear. Do you think He really needs your 10% in order to accomplish His work? He absolutely does not. He's inviting you to be part of His work. because you are his son or his daughter whom he loves. And to be honest with you, in some ways, he kind of wants to show off. Not that he's bragging, but he wants to bring you along. If you ever had such a beautiful experience and you brought a friend or a family member back, you just have to do it. You have to experience it. When I get people to Uganda with me, it's like you got to taste the mangoes. You got to feel the red dirt. You got to experience the children. You got to sit and let them tug on your hair. You've got to experience it. I just want to show it off. Hi, Yoshi. It's good to see you. You got to show it off. God wants to show off this beautiful kingdom that he's built, that he's welcoming you into, that you get to partner with him in building and restoring. That's what generosity is about. Guys, generosity is worship in some of its purest and most beautiful, unadulterated form. It's saying, I will place God above everything else in my life. I choose to worship him above everything else. It's not a question of trust. It's not even a question of mission. It's a question of worship. That's what generosity is. And God invites you to step in and become part of the narrative that he is writing. When I say that, I don't mean that if you don't give, that you don't get to participate here at Lux. It's not a pay-to-play scenario here. We have lots of people who are involved in our church who don't give. We have lots of people who are involved in our church who are part of our service every week, part of our server, part of our community who don't give for a variety of reasons. Because let's just be real, 0% or 10% of zero is still zero, right? So some people you can't give. Some people it's a trying time. Some people you got your finances figured out before you can. Some people are in difficult situations. I totally get that. I completely understand it. God will continue to do what God is going to do in and through Lux. But the reality is there are certain aspects of what we're doing as a church that require money. They require resources. Like we need a staff. If we don't have a staff, we probably don't have a church. And that staff needs to be able to eat food, and they need to be able to have a table to put that food on. No one here at our church is getting rich. As Andy comes on full time with us, he's not getting rich. I haven't gotten rich. I'm not getting rich. But we do need to pay our employees well enough that they don't make more money working at Target, because ministry is hard and eventually they'll be exhausted and they'll be burnt up, and it will be easier to go work at Target. And making total trash money will just be another reason for them to go. So we need a staff, and we need to be able to keep the staff. We need to be able to keep lights on. We need to be able to do things like this and be able to do live streams with a really high caliber of excellence for our church family and for people who don't know us, so that people don't just come into our stream and write us off immediately because our stream looks like trash. Electricity bills need to be paid. Internet bills need to be paid. There's overhead, and we need your help. Like, we need your partnership. If you call Lux your spiritual home, which I've never said this out loud on a stream ever, but if you call Lux your spiritual home, like, we need you to treat it like it is your spiritual home. We're taking a step of faith in this next year. It's not a leap. It's not a jump. It's not a stupid jump. And if you're wondering what type of leap of faith or step of faith we're taking, you can go back and watch Monday Night Live. We talk about all of that through our Monday Night Live. We're going to need your partnership as we move forward. As a church family, to continue bringing light and hope to an otherwise really dark part of our world. We love you. It's been amazing to be able to do Lux with you as a church family. You've been sacrificial and generous. And tonight, listen, we're going to continue to just show that you don't become generous by accident. You become generous by choosing to be generous. We're going to take an offering tonight, and it's just going to be going to Millie and Uganda. It's going to be going to buy food and supplies for a Christmas celebration they do every year in their community for children who would never get a good, healthy meal. They can get a good, healthy meal at Christmas because of what Robert and Millie are doing. So you have an opportunity to be able to give to that tonight, to be able to take that step. If you're like, man, I don't know that I want to give to what you're talking about here at the church, but I do know that I want to support what Millie and them are doing. I want to see kids get fed. It's an opportunity for you to take that first step into generosity tonight. And I want to close with this. Listen, the answer to needing people to tithe inside of a church isn't telling people they need to give their money away. It's teaching people to realign their worship. It's helping people realize that the things that you love are the things that you will become. And the things that you love most will be the things that you bow your knee to. They'll become the things that you worship. So look at the trails in your life. Look at your relationships. Look at your schedule. Look at your bank statements. What do your trails say? What do they lead you to? What do you worship? What do you need to realign, and what do you need to change if you're a follower of Jesus? To choose instead, if it isn't the Lord, to worship the Lord. Let's pray. Father God, I thank you for being here tonight. I thank you for your presence. I hope that tonight it was received well. I hope there's nobody who's feeling convicted or guilty, because that wasn't the goal. Maybe convicted, not guilty. I pray, Father, that our church would indeed be known as a church that is just an outrageously generous church. A church that's learned to live in a form of sacrifice. A church that's learned to say, everything that I have belongs to you, God. None of this is mine. Do with it what you want. Lead and guide me. I'll follow you. Tell me what you want to do. Because if I can pour out, you can pour in. If I can shovel out, you can shovel in, and you have a bigger shovel. I'll trust you, Father. Lead, guide, and direct me wherever it is that you want me to go. I'm there to follow. I love you, Lord, and I thank you. In your name we pray. Amen.
Creation suddenly articulate with 1,000 tongues lift one cry, and from north to south and east to west we hear Christ be magnified. Were the whole world echoing his eminence, his name would burst from sea and sky, from rivers to the mountain tops we'd hear Christ be magnified. We'd hear, oh, Christ be magnified. Just let his praise arise. Christ be magnified in me. Oh, Christ be magnified from the altar of my life. Christ be magnified in me. Every creature finds its inmost melody, and every human heart its native cry, and anyone enraptured hymn of praise will sing Christ be magnified. We sing, oh, Christ be magnified. Just let his praise arise. Christ be magnified in me. Oh, Christ be magnified from the altar of my life. Christ be magnified in me. Yeah. No, I won't bow to idols. I stand strong and worship you. 'Cause if it puts me in the fire, I'll rejoice 'cause you're there too. And I won't be formed by feelings. I hold fast to what is true. And if the cross brings transformation, then I'll be crucified with you. 'Cause death is just the doorway into resurrection life. If I join you in your suffering, then I'll join you when you rise.